I'm going to go straight to Washington, D.C., from where Dr. Mukesh Aghi, who is the President and CEO of US-India Strategic Partnership Forum, joins me live. Dr. Aghi, with Iran's developments reshaping regional dynamics, how do you see these geopolitical shifts influencing India-US trade negotiations? Are we likely to see a recalibration of priorities, perhaps even beyond tariffs?
Well, India is in a very complex situation where you have your biggest trading partner imposing 50% tariff. And then you have two other threats which seems to be lingering. One is the Lindsey Graham bill, which talks about 500% tariff on countries doing business with Russia. And then you have the Iran threat, where the president has said that there could be a 25% additional tariff if you're doing business with Iran. Now, India's trade with Iran is very minimal, roughly around $1.6 billion. So that can be manageable. But US cannot be ignored. And I think, as my understanding goes today, that the discussion on the trade has progressed very well.
That's right.
And now the onus seems to be on part of the US side to be able to move the ball forward. And it's good to see that the new ambassador who just presented his credential will take the lead and try to find a solution. Because I think you can't have a stalemate between India and the US at such stage where you have almost $200 billion of trade getting impacted in some manner. So we will see some kind of a solution coming up. But as far as the Iran goes, I think India can't ignore that because that's not a big fry for India. US is.
But Dr. Aghi, with Trump's new 25% tariffs on Iran-linked trade, I mean, that's what he has said. What steps then should Indian exporters take to safeguard sectors which are tied to particularly the Chabahar port?
Yeah, Chabahar is a slightly different issue here because I think India did get exception for 6 months. And I believe that discussion should continue and that exception should be made for India because India has invested over a couple of $1 billion, and geopolitically, basically, India's access to Central Asia becomes critical. And it is in the interest of the United States that India's trade with Central Asia continues. And the new ambassador, Ambassador Gore, comes from that region. So I think he would be very keen to ensure that there's a support coming to India, so at least the transit trade continues with Central Asia.
You spoke about the new US ambassador to India, Sergio Gore, and of course there was a call that happened between External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, which are signaling that there are points of convergences, particularly on economic interests. How do you anticipate such engagements shaping the tone of the trade talks going ahead?
Well, you have, I call, two PowerPoints where India seems to be connected. You have basically the foreign minister, Jaishankar, connecting directly with the Secretary Rubio. And then you have Sergio Gore, who also still maintains the title of Special Assistant to the President and having a direct line to the President. And I think it's interesting, it is in the interest of India that the Sergio Gore's interests and India's interests are converged together. And so you're able to execute from that perspective because you have direct access to the president from the ambassador, whereas you have to go through Rubio, then Rubio goes to the president. So, but overall, I would say the situation is in flux globally. And US is seeing India as a potential partner in this shifting of the global geopolitics itself, what's happening in Venezuela, with Russia,
Yes.
With Europe, and basically what's happening with Greenland, Iran itself. So we are seeing a lot of moving parts. And India becomes a critical factor, a partner for the United States in trying to manage those moving parts.
Yes, you've spoken about those developments which happened at the beginning of the year. And Dr. Aghi, we have just entered half of January and there are, so many months to go. What structural reforms should India and the US then prioritize to insulate our trade relations from these geopolitical shocks?
Well, one thing you have to give credit to the Prime Minister and the government of India. They have not reacted to a lot of statements coming out of Washington, D.C. or by the politicians in the U.S. They've kept their head down, kept their basically communication to minimal itself.
Yes.
And so so there's no reaction because there's no rebuttal coming out to the rhetoric. So that's number one. So that means India becomes a steady ship when you look at overall scenario in the global turmoil. Second is India has conveyed to the US that it is a trusted partner and it will work with the US as long as the interests are aligned between the two countries. And I think that message continues to go back and forth between Delhi and Washington, D.C. The second aspect is Indian diaspora. You have 5 million Indian Americans, quite active politically in business, community-wise. They are also communicating the same message to the leadership in the US by saying that we are important and we can play a pivotal role. India is critical to us, and India is a trusted partner. In every aspect, India is willing to, has supported US. Years ago, when the US told India to get away from the Iranian purchased oil, India basically worked with the US and basically weaned itself from Iranian oil. Then it happened in Venezuela, also same thing. So I think India has played the ball very, very rightly and being a good partner with the US. So I think overall, the message which seems to be coming out is that you can depend on India as you move the trade discussion, as you move geopolitically, partnership across the world.
Since you spoke about the role of the Indian diaspora, again, the focus will be about how are you seeing these tariff escalations? I mean, that has not been ruled out completely at this point.
Well, I believe that when you look at one is I think we should not look at trade as the only conduit between the two countries. You have defense partnership, you have technology partnership, you have on the academia side now critical mineral partnership. You do have on the diaspora side, and yes, trade is a challenge. But if you look at the big chunk of the trade also seems to have been isolated. So what we are seeing is the impact is taking place more on the small end, like the garment exporters. You look at the jewelry makers, but when you look at the pharma, when you look at the electronic goods, what Apple is exporting, they are isolated. So we need to find a solution and find some exception there. Okay. And I think that's where the new ambassador can play a very critical role. Because when you look at from a Washington, D.C. perspective, the trade issue with India probably is not in the top 10 list at the moment. They're looking at the fires burning in Venezuela, Iran, or Gaza, or Russia itself and Ukraine. So we have to ensure that the India's priority does not get way down in the priority list of the Washington, D.C. And I think that's where the new ambassador can play a very critical role.
All right, Dr. Mukesh Aghi, always a pleasure listening to you and getting your perspective on important issues at these times that we are living in. Thank you so much for speaking to us. And joining me now is Rick Sanchez, the host of Journalistically Speaking. He's joining me from Moscow. Rick, really appreciate your time. You have previously called Donald Trump's tariff policies on countries like India for buying Russian oil as disrespectful and ignorant. Mm-hmm. Does the same apply to his new 25% tariffs on nations trading with Iran? And how effective do you think this will be in isolating Tehran amidst its economic crisis?
Oh, I think it's obviously an action by the United States to try and create conditions in Iran so that they can then, at the behest of Bibi Netanyahu and the Israeli government, bomb Iran. This is really nothing new. A child could figure this out. It's part of the what they often call regime change operation that the West has deployed on many occasions. One of the reasons we recently saw the currency increase by 40% in Iran was because the Western influences wanted to create that condition so that they would have protests in Iran. And then they infiltrated the protesters and made it look like the people of Iran hated their government. So then they could say, oh, look, now we have to go in there and attack Iran and bomb Iran, as John McCain once said, historically speaking. So yes, the short answer to your question is that they're going to do everything possible, either through hook or by crook, to make sure they create those very difficult conditions for Iran. And it's worse for Iran than it was for India, because when it comes to Iran, of course, it's not being done. It's being done at the behest of not only the United States but Israel, which is probably the most powerful country in the planet. When it comes to India, because Israel does not have a specific beef with India, then it was more possible for the Indians to resist and for the United States to beg off, so to speak.
And how are these developments being viewed where you are in Moscow by Kremlin?
I don't think Donald Trump is being taken as seriously as he was before when it comes to tariffs in particular, for two reasons. Because he's moved on to the Maduro affair, and now the bombing, or the so-called prepared or any day now kind of bombing of Iran, the grabbing or taking away of Greenland. So those three things that he's doing have superseded much of the conversation about tariffs, where everyone was looking at Donald Trump and associating him with tariffs. They're now associating him with things that are, some people would argue, much worse. And at the same time, he's having very serious problems in his own country. The protests that you are, I think, showing of what's happening in Iran,
yes,
is actually the actual citizen protests in Iran are nothing compared to the citizen protests that are taking place right now in the United States, where you have ICE agents, the people are calling them thugs, wearing masks in full uniform, looking like special forces, going into communities and looking for anybody who looks like they have particular brown skin and removing them from the streets. It's causing riots, it's causing protests, it's causing anger. People are dying, people are being killed, and it's driven Donald Trump's approval numbers down to between 38 and 40%. That means he's now close to Biden numbers in terms of disapproval, which, interestingly enough, might be another reason why you see the United States trying to show its muscle around the world with tariffs, with threats of intervention.
You know, we are speaking at a time when the protests in Iran are only escalating and the number of those who have been killed is only rising. The US president has tweeted that help is on the way and that this pressure by the protesters should continue. My question then would be that, are you seeing this more of a haphazard pressure that strengthens hardliners, or is this perhaps an economic lever to support regime change from within?
Of course, yes, 100%. This is a color revolution. Let me tell you something, and I hope your viewers get a chance to look this up. Just Google it if you get a chance. Look at what Mike Pompeo, the former CIA director of the United States of America, Donald Trump, recently tweeted. He said, essentially, Happy New Year, and I'm quoting him a little off here, but it's close enough. Congratulations to the protesters in Iran, along with the Mossad agents with them. Listen to what I just said. The former CIA director of the United States is confirming, he's saying the quiet part out loud, that Mossad has infiltrated the protesters and have created these protests. And those infiltrators, according to sources in Iran, are the ones who have been shooting 100 police officers and killing them, and also killing innocent people to make it look like there's this mass protests in Iran. You know, the same thing they did in Ukraine in 2014, the same thing that they have done in Venezuela. You know, my country, which I adore and love for my great people and my great Constitution and all the wonderful things about America, it is, as you said just a moment ago, or alluded to, led by people who are globalists, who are money-hungry warriors, who make money from wars and who make money from these interventions, and they control the U.S. president, they control the Congress, and they control, in many ways, the Senate. And more often than not, when it's not being controlled by the war machine, as we've kind of come to know it, the administrative state, it's controlled by Zionists and more particularly by Israel. So it's kind of a hell of a thing where if you live in America, you elect people to be your leaders, but they're not really the ones who are in charge. The ones who are in charge are above them, and they're unelected.
Okay. My last question, given your experience, Rick, in covering U.S. foreign policy flip-flops, what risks does this pose for global energy markets, especially with China's role as Iran's top oil buyer potentially facing U.S. retaliation, and also what we are seeing in the context of India-Russia?
There's no question that that can become a very large problem. The only reason the United States kidnapped the president of Venezuela, which of course anybody who knows anything about international law knows that they had no right to do that, even if it turns out that Maduro is a drug dealer, which he's not, but even if it turned out that he is trafficking in drugs, you still can't do it. It's not one country's job to go in and do law enforcement for another country.
That's right.
Once we start going down that route, my God, where does that finish, right? But the reason the United States did that is because Venezuela has more crude oil reserves than any country on the planet. And the United States has more refineries that can refine that type of crude than any country in the world. Unfortunately, those refineries are not being used. By getting that crude from Venezuela, the United States would boost its ability to produce, and it would be probably the biggest oil producer in the entire world. That would be something that's the reason it's doing what it's doing with Venezuela. It does put China in a precarious situation. And I think what this does, it hastens then the need for China to hurry up and install Siberia 2 so it can get more of its direct oil from Russia, just as India is and will continue to do. And that triad of India, China, and Russia will continue to grow and become more powerful, and in essence be the only force, if you will,
Okay.
that will kind of stand up to what the Americans and what Mr. Trump is trying to do to monopolize the global energy supply. And that's just when it comes to oil, of course.
That's right.
We're not talking about all hydrocarbons because natural gas becomes a whole different situation. But I do think that we don't know what's going to happen yet. The push by Mr. Trump to try and get American energy companies to go in, Exxon, for example, the biggest of them all, to try and go into Venezuela and start taking the oil out of Venezuela and putting it into the system. And Exxon is saying, no, we don't want to do that just yet. There's a problem for Mr. Trump in that there's a little bit of a lack of level of trust, even amongst his own constituents, to see this thing through.
Okay.
So I can't give you a straight answer as to whether this is going to reset the limits for global oil, but it has the potential to.
Rick, and we have just entered 2026 and we are already looking at turbulence all over. We'll continue to have this conversation. Rick Sanchez, really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
That's all from me on this edition of NewsTrack tonight. We are putting out all those interviews on our website and also on the YouTube channel. Thanks so much for watching.